questions. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Anton.
Thank you so much, Oliver, for organizing this event. And I'm excited that you're all joining us. I will talk about how to use generative AI for economic research, and I will pay particular attention to the needs that we have if we dial up from low and middle income countries, if we don't want to pay the $20 a month subscription that the advanced versions of these tools sometimes require. And if we just want to use these tools for free to the best extent possible. So I'll start with a pitch to you why you should use generative AI. First of all, generative AI systems make us more productive. This has been shown by quite a number of economic studies by now. So across all fields, across anything where cognitive labor is involved, people have found that we can achieve productivity gains from 10%, 20%, up to 50%, and in coding even up to 100%. And I should say, I've also experienced these productivity gains myself as a researcher. So a second reason is that there is an important learning curve. The first hour or so that you're using generative AI, you won't get the maximum out of it yet. I think the first hour can still be really interesting and can still be effective, but it takes something like 10 hours or so to really get the hang of it. And then the third reason, and in my view, that's actually the most important one, is that these tools are improving so fast. And that means the benefits that we're actually getting from them are growing rapidly. And if you are not using generative AI, but your competitors are, that means you will be left behind. So, some special considerations that are particularly relevant for lower income users. First, and I'm not a native English speaker myself, so I have also experienced this on numerous occasions. Generative AI actually helps us to overcome language barriers. In a discipline like economics, where English is the gold standard, those for whom English is a second language are at a little bit of a disadvantage. Uh, Yet, with generative AI, we can reduce that disadvantage. We can make sure that the texts that we produce are first rate, are immaculate to read. And that is really highly valuable. So you can't imagine how many of my students I have already recommended generative AI to, because if you are not a native English speaker, it's harder to write cutting edge papers and to write papers that also make a professional impression. So if you run them through generative AI and you tell it, fix the language in the following text, or things like that, that really helps. I will also focus on which of the cutting edge generative AI tools are free. And the good message here, the good news is that, in fact, two of the three most advanced systems offer free access, and that's really good news. And yeah, ultimately, if you are following us here on this live webinar, that means your internet connection is already way better than what you need to interact with generative AI that is text-based. A slow internet connection is really all that's needed to interact with a system like ChatGPT. So ultimately, our goal is we know that there is a digital divide that is still far too large, but we want to prevent that digital divide from transforming into an intelligence divide. We want to make sure that no matter where in the world you are, you can benefit from these amazing new tools that give you access to the most cutting edge generative AI models. All right. So maybe some starting advice. first thing I would say, and we will get to a slide that talks about which models in a moment, but use the best large language model that you can access. For a lot of people, that's going to be ChatGPT, um, but not necessarily for everyone. Uh, and then treat the large language model, treat the AI model as if it was your intern, like a human intern. I think obviously these systems are not human, but it's a good mental model to have when you interact with them. Yeah, and in particular, imagine they are an intern who is incredibly smart, incredibly motivated, really eager to help, but lacks complete context of what you're doing. So, in other words, imagine there's this intern who comes to their job on the very first day, and they don't even know that you are interested in doing economic work or finance work or whatever it is that you're working on. And they just say, "Hi, I'm here to help." They don't know if you want to be entertained, they don't know if you want to do research. You need to tell it everything because it basically starts from a blank slate when you open up your chatbot. So that means our job as users is first of all to provide the background and context of what you're doing. Secondly, to iterate and experiment. If your intern doesn't immediately produce what you wanted, you just tell them, hey, I actually wanted something different, and you try to explain it in more detail. And that means you also need to have a little bit of patience, especially as you're starting out with generative AI tools and learning how to use them the most effective way possible. So, what are the leading models as of, I didn't update this in the past week, but as of October 10th? Well, the best model is OpenAI's GPT-4o. And I have marked the row in green because it allows anybody in the world to sign up for free and to get access to that most cutting edge model that OpenAI is offering. Their numbers 2 and 3 are Google Gemini and Elon Musk's XAI Grok. So those don't offer you access to the most advanced model unless you pay. However, the one in the fourth line, it's also marked in green. Anthropic's Claude allows you free access to the Claude 3.5 Sonnet model, which is the best one that they have. And that's available at claude.ai. So I use mostly those two models that I have marked in green here. And the beautiful thing is, if you pay for it, then you can use it a bit more often and maybe it's a little bit faster. But you get access to exactly the same model if you just sign up for a free account. And yeah, in the fifth line here, you see a model by Meta. It's called Llama 3.1, which also ranks very close to the other five here. And it's available open source. So that means if you work, for example, in a central bank or in a place where information security is really important, then you can actually download the model on a computer there and operate it there without your data ever leaving your building or your room. And that means it allows for the greatest information security possible. All right, so those are the cutting edge models. I want to say a little bit more about the speed of progress in AI before I go into kind of more tangible use cases. So, first of all, what is all this progress driven by? Uh, Most of us haven't heard about large language models, the main category of AI models that everybody is talking now, until 2 years ago. But progress in AI has been going on for decades, and these systems have been improving for decades. And there are two regularities that I want to highlight. The first one is Moore's Law, which basically tells us that computer chips get twice as good every 2 years. Well, that means, they get 1,000 times as good every 20 years. And 1 million times as good every 40 years. And that has driven a lot of the progress over the past few decades, and that has brought us to the point where we are right now. However, there is something that has been happening much, much faster, and that's why large language models have suddenly entered the stage and have been improving so rapidly. And that's the fact that the computing power, or people use the word compute, that has been used to train these cutting edge AI models, these large language models, that has been doubling every 6 months for the past 15 years. So what that means is that companies in Silicon Valley and elsewhere are using twice as much computational power to train their most cutting edge systems. So this is much faster than Moore's law. If something doubles every 6 months, that means it becomes 1,000 times bigger in 5 years and 1 million times bigger in 10 years. And that is essentially the force that has made language models so powerful in the past couple of years. Now, moreover, the algorithmic efficiency by which this compute is used, by which this computational power is employed for training, has also been growing at a rate of like 2.5x every year. And the amazing thing is, these companies, they're spending more and more and more on training these models, and we all around the world can have access to them for free. So this is really, at some level, it's an amazing feat. You have intelligence at your fingertips without having to pay a lot of money for it. And I hope that that will continue for some time to come. Now, there are also so-called scaling laws, which describe how the amount of computational power that goes into these systems leads to more and more capabilities. And if you are wondering how these companies can essentially take bets like, let's invest another 100 million in training the next AI systems, the reason why they're doing that is because these laws have given them predictability. They have given them a way to forecast, if we spend more on training the next model, how much better is it going to be? And that kind of predictability is basically at the heart of the frontier AI labs for reaching human level intelligence, or artificial general intelligence, as it is also called. All right. So this was kind of some background, but now I want to turn to how we use generative AI in research. And this is all based on my recent paper in the Journal of Economic Literature. And the journal, the editor of the journal, has in fact made me promise that I will send them a semi-annual update to basically make sure that the paper does not go stale. Uh, and in that update, I cover the advances that have been happening every half a year. So, in fact, last week, I just submitted the most recent update to the journal. And Oliver, would you mind sharing that in the chat? So Oliver is going to send you a link. If you are interested in the most up-to-date version, you can use that link. That is not reviewed yet because it is brand new, but the benefit of that is it captures the state of the art as of just a couple of days ago. All right. So what are the main avenues of accessing these large language models? The most traditional one, and that's the one for which a really slow internet connection is enough, is simply as a chatbot. So this is what all of us who have seen ChatGPT are used to. And that's very powerful. And frankly, that's the way how I spend most of my time using these models. A second and newer mode of interacting is as an interactive voice assistant. So if you have, for example, the ChatGPT app on your phone, or I think Google Gemini allows for similar capabilities, then you can simply talk to your AI, and you can do that in multiple languages. It's going to understand you in pretty much all common languages, so all the top 20 languages spoken in the world, and you can interact in a much more intuitive way. However, the downside is it's going to take up much more data than if you just type text. And then the third point here, which I have also highlighted as new, is to collaborate with these models in interactive workspaces. So if you use ChatGPT, then there's a new beta version, and I don't know actually if that particular part is already available in the free version or if that's only going to be rolled out in the next few months. But there's this new interactive workspace called Canvas, which allows you to basically open up a second window in your ChatGPT, and you can interact with a given text or program code that you're working on one side and give ChatGPT instructions on the other side. Claude has a very similar feature called Artifact, and that one is available for free users as well. And Microsoft, and again, this one is not free now, is offering a Copilot for its Office package. So that also allows for collaborative interaction with a given document. So those two are kind of new ways of interacting that have only really become possible in the past 6 months. However, there are two more older ways. One of them is web-based experimentation platforms. I'll show you a screenshot of one of those. So, for example, OpenAI has a playground where you can enter a user message and you let the model respond, and you can, on the right-hand side here on the screen, you can see that there's a whole bunch of parameters that you can affect. You can, for example, determine how much randomness there is. That's in the temperature parameter, or a whole range of other things. And that allows you to customize your interaction with the model a little more. And moreover, there are also application programming interfaces that allow you to call up language models from within your own computer programs. So this is what you use if you want to analyze, for example, I don't know, 10,000 tweets automatically, and you want the language model to work as your RA and give you a rating for each of the 10,000. Is this positive or negative or neutral? You can just run a loop with 1,000 or 10,000 iterations, and you go through each of them in an automated way, and you can treat these systems as your research assistant. For these application programming interfaces, you typically have to pay, but I should say, usually when I interact with them, I pay like maybe 5 cents or 10 cents because it has become so cheap to use these systems. So it is usually not a major expense. If you have a project that requires more significant expenditure of compute credit, then you can actually apply for a grant from OpenAI. And they are fairly liberal in giving funds to researchers in low and middle income countries. So if you describe a plausible research project, there's a good probability that they will give you free compute credits with which you can process your data. So this would be just a demonstration of computer code that calls up one of Anthropic's systems. You see here in line 6, you need to give the system an API key, which is kind of like a credit card number. And then you can enter a message and call the API, and it delivers your response, and you can print that. So it's as simple as that. If you're not a programmer, then of course the AI can write the program for you. So you don't need to be able to do this yourself. You can tell it, I want to analyze the sentiment in 10,000 tweets. Please write a program to do that. And it can guide you through that step by step. So before I go into like tangible use cases, let me also highlight a couple of risks that we need to be aware of. The first one, information security. So if your job requires you to treat information confidentially, like for example, as a central bank, what I mentioned before, or in the Ministry of Finance or something, then obviously you need to make sure that you satisfy the information security standards. And that's where open source models like Llama, for example, would be extremely valuable because you can use them without data ever leaving your workspace. Another risk that we need to be aware of, and that in some ways you get used to as you interact with these systems, is hallucination. So we call it hallucination when language models make things up. And this happens nowadays, especially when you kind of push them to their limits. When you ask them something and they give you some vague answer and you tell them, well, be more specific, um, and you really push it for more, then you can oftentimes make these models hallucinate. It is getting a lot better. So let's say compared to 1.5 years ago, when we only had the simple version of ChatGPT, models hallucinate a lot less and they know a lot more. But the problem still persists. And in some ways, it's inherent to the nature of large language models. Just like we humans are never recalling information 100%, and we sometimes misremember things and report things a bit inaccurately, these models do it as well. Uh, Another significant risk that we need to be aware of is bias. So these models have been trained based on all the available data around the globe, but heavily influenced by what is on the internet. And that means that all the biases that are on the internet are at some level also propagated in these models. And that's something we need to be aware of. Depending on your application, if you ask it, for example, to write code to analyze data, then this may be completely irrelevant. But if you ask it something that has a more social dimension to it, then you always need to be aware of the bias. And yeah, lastly, I think a risk that will become increasingly important as more and more researchers are using these models is the homogeneity that it delivers. So if we all use the same models, we get the same responses for the same inputs, or at least similar responses. And that risks making our work more and more homogeneous. So what that means is we should always make sure that we steer the model into like what our specific take on a certain subject matter is. And if you do that, then you make sure that your voice is represented in the output it generates, and it's not just the most generic output. All right. So I'll show you 7 different categories of capabilities now. And I will go through a couple of tangible use cases. Uh, I won't be able to cover all of the use cases, but you can look them up in the paper. And if you are new to this material, maybe it's useful to just browse through the paper and get a sense of what people are doing to take advantage of these generative AI tools. So this goes, basically, I've tried to represent the whole process of research, starting from coming up with ideas and getting feedback to writing, background research, some coding and data analysis, sometimes doing math. And ultimately, when you are done with the paper, you want to promote it. So Oliver gave you the link. I should also mention I have this website, genaiforecon.org, which is not updated to October 2024 yet because the paper is so brand new, but it allows you to see some of these use cases live. And also, if you click on that URL, you can sign up for future updates. So that means every half year, you're going to get a message from me that tells you, hey, look, here is the most recent data update, the most recent paper update, and you can sign up for that. it's an easy unsubscribe if you don't find those emails valuable. All right, here is a more detailed list of all the capabilities, and these are all the examples reported in the paper. But let me actually stop my PowerPoint slides now and move over to ChatGPT to give you a simple example of a live training. So I am switching to my ChatGPT window. Oliver, can you see my ChatGPT? And you can see here at the top left, I have activated ChatGPT 4.0. So this is the model that I'm using. And that's the model that anybody around the world where ChatGPT is not banned can access. And let me do what I said before, which is to give the model some context. So I will tell ChatGPT, I am an economic researcher working on the implications of transformative advances in AI. Can you help me brainstorm what different, or let me say, brainstorm what the effects of advances in AI on labor markets are going to be? Please list, and I'll do something like in the paper, 20 different channels, one line each, and I have to tell it one line each because otherwise it's going to generate way too much content. So let me press enter, and it tells us, of course, it reports 2 lines for each of them. But yeah, it gives us, I guess, what are the most important topics in this area of the labor market effects of transformative advances in AI. It starts with the automation of routine jobs, creation of new jobs, skill polarization. This is, of course, anything that like an advisor in a top 20 econ department would also tell you as the most important channels. Now, it is still somewhat generic because it is based on the existing conventional wisdom, right? But it is very useful to be aware of all these different channels before you start doing your work. So let me try something different now. Let me say, I believe that AI will have human level capabilities across the board in just a few years. What would be good research topics given my beliefs? So I'm pushing it a little bit more into a specific corner now, right? Economic models of AI-driven productivity growth, labor market dynamics in the age of human-level AI, and so on and so forth, universal basic income in a post-AI economy. And I should say, several of these topics are indeed questions that I'm currently working on and that I find extremely important and relevant in this particular context. Okay, so I will go back to our slides again now and share a few specific results because that allows me to go more efficiently through things. So I demonstrated the brainstorming to you live, and this is the example of brainstorming in the paper. This would be eliciting feedback. So I'm asking GPT-4 here, what are the top 3 pros and cons of working on a particular topic? And it can report pros and cons that are very accurate here. Another example, and this is now Claude, not ChatGPT, but it really works well with both systems. I have uploaded a paper of mine and I have asked it, can you suggest ways to improve this paper? And the model gives me some very tangible suggestions for how to do that. If you want to, you can ask it follow-up questions, and it can give you more detailed advice on that. Again, this advice is not necessarily at the very frontier of research, but it allows you to come close to the frontier of research because these models have been trained by what already exists. These are other examples of brainstorming that I found quite useful. And then let me turn to the next set of capabilities. The next thing is writing. Now, if English is not your first language, this is perhaps the most useful capability for you. And let me jump right into an example. Here, I'm asking ChatGPT, write a paragraph in the style of an academic economist that integrates the following points. And I'm also telling it, include a topic sentence. And then I'll just giving bullet points. And it writes my paragraph based on that. It would correct if I make mistakes. So this is actually something very useful for somebody who is not a native English speaker. Here, I'm asking the model, can you correct the following sentence? And I'm intentionally putting in like 7 or 8 different mistakes. Every word that is in bold is a mistake. Sorry. Here in the upper bar, in the purple bar, I have the false sentence with mistakes, and then in the first chat response in the light purple bar, I have the correction. So you see it fixed 7 different mistakes, uh, like my use of singular, plural, misspellings, and so on and so forth. So this is what I recommend to all of my students who are not native speakers when they have difficulty with grammar or spelling. And it's fantastic at it. It also can give you stylistic advice. So here I'm asking it, can you give me a list of stylistic shortcomings? And it gives me a very good list. I can also ask it, can you revise the text according to that advice? And it is doing that perfectly here in this example. Now, there are many more examples about writing, like rewriting text in a different style. For example, you can upload a research paper of yours and you can write it in a style that would be good for a blog post or things like that. Here it is trying to write an equation that I have uploaded in LaTeX, but this is something that the model is still struggling with right now. All right, once you have written your paper, there are a lot of tasks that involve like promotion. So here, for example, I'm asking it, what would be catchy titles for my paper? And first of all, first in the first chat, it is generating titles that are maybe a little bit too catchy for my sense. And then in the second chat, I'm telling it, make them a bit more sober and keep them short. And you see that the first title, Generative AI in Economic Research, is actually very close to the title under which my paper was ultimately published. So I used this. All right, then it can generate tweets that allow you to advertise the paper and things like that. And it can, once you have finished a research paper, it can also help you generate slide decks for your paper presentation. So here I'm again using Claude to prepare slides for this particular paper that I'm now presenting. I'm increasingly starting to use that for like a first draft of my slides. And then, of course, I'm manually adapting them to make sure that they really capture precisely what I want to say. So let's turn to the next topic, which is background research. Researching the literature, that's something where you have to really beware of the hallucination of generative AI systems. But there is a tool called Perplexity, which is also free. And maybe Oliver, would you mind putting the link to that Perplexity in the chat for everybody. That is also free, and that can kind of provide you with a summary of the literature in a more fact-based manner. And the most advanced version of Gemini, it can even summarize YouTube videos. So if you don't have time or you don't have the bandwidth to watch a full YouTube video, you can copy and paste the link to it, and you can ask Google's Gemini to summarize it for you. It's also in the paper. I think I have to hurry now because I'm approaching the end of my allotted time. So let me perhaps jump through a few slides. Um, Let me say one thing about AI models explaining economic concepts. So they also work as tutors, but you have to be aware that they sometimes hallucinate. So what I usually do when I ask it simple questions, then I know that current systems are already pretty good at explaining them. That wasn't always the case, because here I have an example where GPT 3.5, basically the original ChatGPT, hallucinated the definition of the second theorem of welfare economics. But today's models already would know a question like this. If I'm not sure, I just try out multiple different models, and if they all give the same answer, then it's usually right. So coding, if you write computer code, that's one of the things where generative AI really allows for transformative productivity gains, like 100% productivity gains plus. And here is an example of where ChatGPT simulated the Solo model and plotted the result in a 4-chart. This used to be like a graduate student homework that would take people hours, and now you can do it in 20 seconds. It can also explain code. It can convert code from one programming language into another. It can correct mistakes and can do lots of things for coding. Similar for data analysis, it can suggest data sources, it can create figures for you. You can upload spreadsheets and ask it to work on them, to perform regressions, for example. And it can even simulate human experimental subjects. So if you don't have much of a research budget, you can spend something like $1 and you can simulate a few hundred AI agents that act kind of like different agents in a real world experiment. So these are the examples of that. In the paper, there's more. And I should also say, these models are slowly acquiring the capability to perform math, but they regularly make mistakes. So don't trust current generative AI models with mathematical derivations without checking them. They can save you time, but you need to check things line by line. Here is, for example, an optimization problem with CES preferences. GPT-4 managed to take the first order conditions correctly, but when I asked it to derive demand conditions, it made a mistake here and carried that mistake throughout the solutions. However, when I told it what the mistake was, it managed to correct it and give me the right solution. So when you do mathematical derivations, it's really crucial that you check the results. So let me come to Oliver. Do I have like 3 minutes for 3 concluding slides? Thank you. Some short-term lessons. These large language models are increasingly becoming useful assistants and tutors that allows us to automate more and more tasks and make our research more productive. However, a lot of people are not using them. The diffusion of these tools is taking time, and I think it really wastes a lot of our human effort. It's as if we didn't use calculators, even though they have already been developed and we have access to them. And yeah, even if something that you tried out 3 months ago didn't work, try it again and try it again every 3 months or every 6 months, because the capabilities of these AI systems are advancing just so rapidly. So in the medium term, over the coming year, a lot of people on the West Coast are predicting that we will have more and more AI agents, systems that can act autonomously to achieve goals. One example, and it's still at a very early stage, I should say, is a Japanese startup has recently released a paper that would automate the process of writing research papers. This particular one is only in computer science and only in a narrow area, but we should basically expect systems like that to be around soon. And yeah, what are projections in the medium term? Over the coming decade, it is probably more likely than not that AI labs will achieve artificial general intelligence, AI that can perform any human cognitive task, reasoning, problem solving, abstract thinking, creativity, even emotional intelligence. And that could automate lots of things, including the automation of creating better AIs, which could lead to an intelligence explosion. So what that means is if we have spent many, many years doing research, many of us are probably going to be in for some deflating experiences. But since we are at time, let me just conclude. Uh, as we have seen in this presentation today, the capabilities of generative AI are increasing rapidly. So go and use them. We can reap large productivity gains. But as we marvel over the capabilities of these systems, we should also think about the medium-term impacts on ourselves and our workforce, our economy, and our world. And I think we economists have a lot of really important research to do on these transformative effects of rapid advances in artificial intelligence. And we have the tools to provide answers to these questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anton. That was really, really incredibly useful. I guess one of the uses of AI that you kind of skipped over a bit, but was on the slide, is for formatting references, which is definitely one that has saved me an absolute ton of time.
Yes.
So we've had quite a few questions through. I'll pose them in kind of a couple at a time, just so that you can
Okay.
kind of get through as many as possible. We've had quite a few on kind of plagiarism. So Linda's asked basically how they can avoid plagiarism when using AI tools. And then Florent has asked kind of how you cite the use of AI tools and what if there's any kind of strict formats about that. And yeah, we had a couple of other questions on plagiarism as well. So maybe you could speak about that briefly.
Yeah, I think that's a very important question. And in my experience, if you don't feed in a specific text into these systems, they are never going to reproduce text in an existing paper verbatim. So these systems, they distill the essence of text, but unless you feed in, let's say, the famous paper from economist X, it won't regurgitate that paper word for word. And what that means is you can feel free to use the output of these systems as yours because you have generated it. And all of the companies that I have listed before allow users to use the output generated as their own. And I think, in fact, in the future, uh, us writing papers will increasingly consist of us directing AI systems to write papers. So what I do in my own research is if somebody asks me for disclaimers, then I put a footnote on the title page and I write, I have used generative AI in compiling this paper. People don't ask for it. I don't do that because that's just part of the way of writing papers in 2024. I also don't declare that I use a typewriter or that I use a calculator. Those are just the tools that we have at our hands. And of course, the crucial thing is that the responsibility for the content that you are publishing is yours. And in some ways, being the author means that you are responsible for having checked everything.
Great, thanks. So we've had a couple of other questions. So one from Patrick, who's asked about if there's any kind of easy indicators of when a model is hallucinating. And then we had one from Nana who has asked whether there are kind of unique strengths to different models, and whether you kind of have any advice on using model X for a specific purpose versus another.
Um, yeah, so I personally, I use Claude for most of my writing because I find I like its language. It has a very nice writing style. And I use ChatGPT for more quantitative analysis and coding and so on. Um, and sorry, what was the first question, Oliver?
Whether there are easy indicators of when
Oh,
a
yeah,
model is hallucinating.
unfortunately not. Yeah, one of the problems is the systems will tell you with the same conviction uh, when they're hallucinating as they will tell you things when they're giving you authoritative responses. So if you ask it something that's like within the body of what a well-educated person would know, then hallucination nowadays is not that common anymore. But if you ask it something that's, for example, at the frontier of research in a field like economics, then you will regularly encounter hallucination.
And then a couple of other questions we've had through. So we had one from Kanish who asked about how we will actually be able to distinguish AI content from human content in research. And I guess if that's something that's possible now and whether it will be possible in the future. And then another who asks about the issue of kind of the privacy of data and uploading personal documents, I guess, kind of research that you've not released yet,
Yeah.
and things along those lines.
Yeah, about distinguishing content, it's essentially impossible to do it in a reliable way. So it's all human language. And, you know, there are some tools that claim that they can detect whether something is AI generated or not. But there is a very high false positive and also false negative rate. So it's really not possible to reliably tell. I'll also say when I write stuff, I regularly write like a first draft myself, and then I ask Claude, can you write this more nicely? Or I give Claude bullet points and ask it to write a whole paragraph about it with the content that I have produced. And, we are becoming increasingly, we're entering increasingly a world where content is co-generated by humans and AI. And when that is the case, I think it doesn't even make sense to try to distinguish what is the AI and what's the human.
Thanks. A couple of other questions we've had through. We had one from kind of Sajid who's asked about the aggregate effects of AI on researchers. Obviously, in the short term, there are all these productivity gains that you're talking about, but they're wondering whether there'll be any kind of an adverse effect on the critical thinking abilities of researchers if they become reliant on these tools.
Probably there will be some. So I think a useful model is the calculator. When calculators were introduced, people became less good at calculating, right? Because you could just type everything into this magical tool. Um, and yeah, it allowed people to do more things and to do better things in other domains. But kind of our ability to calculate in our heads or even to calculate on paper has deteriorated. And I imagine that over time we will see similar effects from generative AI tools. And, maybe in 5 years from now, a lot of people will have difficulty writing well if the AI doesn't assist them. If it develops really fast, which I think is also a plausible scenario, then maybe the AI will write the papers all by itself in 5 years anyways.
Yeah, well, that's a crazy thought, but I guess given the progress that you've shown, it does seem maybe not so far-fetched. So we're now going to
Right.
have Martin join us. So I'd like to thank Anton again for his incredibly useful presentation. I will be putting a link in the chat at the end where you can find his paper and the website, which kind of goes through in detail all of the topics that he was touching on in this event. So thank you, Anton, so much
Thank
for your
you again,
presentation.
Oliver.
Great. And now we're going to hear from Martin, who has been one of the team putting together the website Ungated Research, which he will now explain to everyone.
Great. Thank you, Oliver. Thanks for being here. I just want to give a 4 or 5 minute introduction to the website. It's one that I built on with Susie Godlin of Williams College. And the main motivation was I was attending a training of African scholars this summer, and I was asking, like, how many of you have access to the top econ journals? And it's quite shocking that less than 10% of the attendants did. And if you think about it, that's really problematic if part of the doing research is knowing where the frontier is and making sure you know what your contribution is. So that motivated us to create this website called Ungated Research. You can find it at ungatedresearch.org. And what we're doing here is we look at some of the top journals in economics. And there are really two motivations. One is to create access to working papers. So what we did is here we compiled for all these journals. You can click on the AER, for example, look at different years. Say I want to look at issue 5. So here you see the content of a specific journal issue. And for example, let me click on this paper right here. So what we're doing here is we're taking the abstract for that paper. You can find the citation here, and we do several things. Most importantly, here you can click the download, you can download the working paper. So these are now publicly available. They're not copyrighted. So this is a way for you, if you don't have access to the journal itself, to get access to the working paper. You can see how old the working paper is. Of course, if you have access to the journal, we have a link here and you can access the journal article. So that's sort of one aspect where we just want to make sure that people have access to the most recent research. And of course, you need to be somewhat concerned that there may be a time lag between the working paper and the publication, the version may differ, etc. So these are all limitations to be aware of. Now, the second thing we do is we use AI to create a summary of the paper. And so, for example, for this paper, I'm not an expert on spatial equilibrium models, so maybe I can help create a summary. So what we did is we created with Gemini, we created a structured summary of the working paper based on the introduction, importantly. So here you see like a short summary of the paper. What is the main research question? What is the sample? What is the context? What is the method? What are the key findings? And then a discussion on the contributions, the open research questions, etc. So again, this is all AI generated based on the introduction of the working paper. And as Anton was saying, of course, we need to be concerned about hallucination. So we did some initial research and testing how good these summaries are, basically by sending a summary to the authors of these papers and letting them rate them. Okay, so let me just show you what we found. So if you go to about the website, you go to method, you can learn a bit more about what we're doing here. And then clicking on limitations, we are concerned about the quality. And what we find when we let the researchers rate them on a scale from 1 to 10, it does pretty good, but not perfect. So the average score is around like 7 to 8 on a 10-point scale. And I think that's pretty indicative of where AI is these days. It's pretty good, but not perfect. But importantly, when we look at the key findings, it does particularly well, and we have almost no case of hallucination. So like Anton was saying, you need to double check, and we think of this as very much as a starting point of doing research. and it's your responsibility to double check because you are the author of your research. But I think this can be a very good like first step of learning about literature and learning about papers. At least that's how we view it. There's some other limitations. It's only, it's a pretty short summary. The journals are still pretty limited. We're hoping to expand the number of journals and the amount of time going back. And importantly, they're also not peer-reviewed to the extent that the article is changing, that is not reflected in our summaries. So one more thing on the time lag. So this was interesting for us. We looked at the time lag between the working paper, the most recent working paper we found, and the publication date. And we're surprised that most of the papers are actually within a year. They're not that old, just a year or year and a half is the median time. So suggesting that researchers actually update their working papers close to publication, which is a good news for us. I want to show one last feature of the website that I find particularly helpful. So we create tags. So for every article, we create tags on the method, the field, and the location. And what we can do is there are two search functions. Either I can look for terms, like say I'm interested in discrimination, if I can spell that right, discrimination, okay. So we find 21 articles with discrimination. That is sort of one feature where you can look for specific terms. The other thing that may even be more interesting is when, so again, I told you that we create these tags, or AI is creating these tags for us. So here you have a way to search for specific things you're interested in. So for example, you may be interested in behavioral economics that uses a certain method, say field experiments and lab experiments. Okay, and then we find 55 articles that fulfill these criteria. Or you may be interested in research in a specific country. So you may be from or a region in sub-Saharan Africa, or let's say I'm interested in what is the latest research in Argentina. Then I can find these papers that specifically deal with Argentina. And AI is not perfect. There's definitely some miscategorizations, but it does a pretty good job, and we're still refining the prompt on this. So I think this is where I want to leave it. And I'm really curious, Susie and I are really curious about your feedback. So if you have any, try out the website, if you have any thoughts on additional features you want to see. So again, we have some things we're working on, such as text to voice, etc. These articles already have Spanish and French translation, but we think about different features as well. So again, we're curious about your feedback. So if you want to take some time and contact us, you can either find us on our websites, or there's an email address right here. I'm also happy to stay on if anyone wants to discuss anything further, but I think I'm going to leave it here. Thanks, Oliver.
Thanks so much, Martin. And yeah, it's an incredibly useful website that I've already been using to kind of find research on specific topics. And yeah, the AI summaries are a good way of getting a very brief, broad overview of different papers. So yeah, thank you both very much for joining us today. Hopefully everyone kind of found that useful. And the key kind of message for both of the different websites we've seen presented today is that there's a lot more detail available online. So I've put a link in the chat to the event page on VoxDev, and on that event page there's links to Anton's most recent paper, the website, the companion website, and then also Ungated research. So yeah, make sure you check